Section 1 of After Dark. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. After Dark by Wilkie Collins. Part 1. Leaves from Leah's Diary. 26th February 1827. The doctor has just called for the third time to examine my husband's eyes. Thank God, there is no fear at present of my poor William losing his sight, provided he can be prevailed on to attend rigidly to the medical instructions for preserving it. These instructions, which forbid him to exercise his profession for the next 6 months at least, are, in our case, very hard to follow. They will but too probably sentence us to poverty, perhaps to actual want, but they must be borne resignedly, and even thankfully, seeing that my husband's forced cessation from work will save him from the dreadful affliction of loss of sight. I think I can answer for my own cheerfulness and endurance now that we know the worst. Can I answer for our children also? Surely I can, when there are only 2 of them. It is a sad confession to make, but now, for the first time since my marriage, I feel thankful that we have no more. 17th. A dread came over me last night after I had comforted William as well as I could about the future, and had heard him fall off to sleep, that the doctor had not told us the worst. Medical men do sometimes deceive their patients from what has always seemed to me to be misdirected kindness of heart. The mere suspicion that I had been trifled with on the subject of my husband's illness caused me such uneasiness that I made an excuse to get out and went in secret to the doctor. Fortunately, I found him at home, and in 3 words I confessed to him the object of my visit. He smiled and said I might make myself easy, he had told us the worst. And that worst, I said to make certain, is that for the next 6 months my husband must allow his eyes to have the most perfect repose. Exactly, the doctor answered. Mind, I don't say that he may not dispense with his green shade indoors for an hour or 2 at a time as the inflammation gets subdued, but I do most positively repeat that he must not employ his eyes. He must not touch a brush or pencil. He must not think of taking another likeness on any consideration whatever for the next 6 months. His persisting in finishing those 2 portraits at the time when his eyes first began to fail was the real cause of all the bad symptoms that we've had to combat ever since. I warned him, if you remember, Mrs. Kirby, when he first came to practice in our neighbourhood. I know you did, sir, I replied. But what was a poor travelling portrait painter like my husband, who lives by taking likenesses first in one place and then in another, to do? Our bread depended on his using his eyes at the very time when you warned him to let them have a rest. Have you no other resources? No money but the money Mr. Kirby can get by portrait painting? Asked the doctor. None, I answered, with a sinking at my heart as I thought of his bill for medical attendance. Will you pardon me, he said, colouring and looking a little uneasy, or rather, will you ascribe it to the friendly interest I feel in you, if I ask whether Mr. Kirby realizes a comfortable income by the practice of his profession? Don't, he went on anxiously before I could reply, pray don't think I make this inquiry from a motive of impertinent curiosity. I felt quite satisfied that he could have no improper motive for asking the question, and so answered it at once, plainly and truly. My husband makes but a small income, I said. Famous London portrait painters get great prices from their sitters, but poor unknown artists who only travel about the country are obliged to work hard and be contented with very small gains. After we've paid all that we owe here, I'm afraid we shall have little enough left to retire on when we take refuge in some cheaper place. In that case, said the good doctor, I'm so glad and proud to remember that I always liked him from the first. In that case, don't make yourself anxious about my bill when you're thinking of clearing off your debts here. I can afford to wait till Mr. Kirby's eyes are well again, and I shall then ask him for a likeness of my little daughter. By that arrangement we are sure to be both quits, and both perfectly satisfied." He considerately shook hands and bade me farewell before I could say half the grateful words to him that were on my lips. Never, never shall I forget that he relieved me of my two heaviest anxieties at the most anxious time of my life. The merciful, warm-hearted man! I could almost have knelt down and kissed his doorstep as I crossed it on my way home. 18th. If I had not resolved, after what happened yesterday, to look only at the cheerful side of things for the future, the events of today would have robbed me of all my courage, at the very outset of our troubles. First, there was the casting up of our bills, and the discovery, when the amount of them was balanced against all the money we have saved up, that we shall only have between £3 and £4 left in the cash box after we have got out of debt. Then there was the sad necessity of writing letters in my husband's name to the rich people who were ready to employ him, telling them of the affliction that had overtaken him, and of the impossibility of his executing their orders for portraits for the next 6 months to come. And lastly, there was the heart-breaking business for me to go through of giving our landlord warning just as we'd got comfortably settled in our new abode. If William could only have gone on with his work, we might have stopped in this town, and in these clean, comfortable lodgings, for at least 3 or 4 months. We have never had the use of a nice empty garret before, for the children to play in, and I never met with any landlady so pleasant to deal with in the kitchen as the landlady here. And now we must leave all this comfort and happiness and go, I hardly know where. William, in his bitterness, says to the workhouse. But that shall never be, if I have to go out to service to prevent it. The darkness is coming on, and we must save in candles, or I could write much more. Ah me, what a day this has been! I've had but one pleasant moment since it began, and that was in the morning when I set my little Emily to work on a bead purse for the kind doctor's daughter. My child, young as she is wonderfully neat-handed at stringing beads, and even a poor little empty purse as a token of our gratitude is better than nothing at all. 19th. A visit from our best friend, our only friend here, the doctor. After he had examined William's eyes and had reported that they were getting on as well as can be hoped at present, he asked where we thought of going to live. I said in the cheapest place we could find, and added that I was about to make inquiries in the by-streets of the town that very day. "Put off those inquiries," he said, "till you hear from me again. I'm going now to see a patient at a farmhouse 5 miles off. You needn't look at the children, Mrs. Kirby, it's nothing infectious, only a clumsy lad who has broken his collarbone by a fall from a horse. They receive lodgers occasionally at the farmhouse, and I know no reason why they should not be willing to receive you. If you want to be well housed and well fed at a cheap rate, and if you like the society of honest, hearty people, the farm of Appletreewick is the very place for you. Don't thank me till you know whether I can get you these new lodgings or not. And in the meantime, settle all your business affairs here so as to be able to move at a moment's notice." With those words, the kind-hearted gentleman nodded and went out. Pray heaven he may succeed at the farmhouse. We may be sure of the children's health at least, if we live in the country. Talking of the children, I must not omit to record that Emily has nearly done one end of the bead purse already. 20th. A note from the doctor, who is too busy to call. Such good news! They will give us 2 bedrooms and board us with the family at Appletreewick for 17 shillings a week. By my calculations, we shall have £3 16 left after paying what we owe here. That will be enough, at the outset, for 4 weeks' living at the farmhouse, with 8 shillings to spare besides. By embroidery work I can easily make 9 shillings more to put to that, and there is a 5th week provided for. Surely, in 5 weeks' time, considering the number of things I can turn my hand to, we may hit on some plan for getting a little money. This is what I am always telling my husband, and what, by dint of constantly repeating it, I am getting to believe myself. William, as is but natural, poor fellow, does not take so light-hearted a view of the future as I do. He says that the prospect of sitting idle and being kept by his wife for months to come is something more wretched and hopeless than words can describe. I try to raise his spirits by reminding him of his years of honest hard work for me and the children, and of the doctor's assurance that his eyes will get the better, in good time, of their present helpless state. but he still sighs and murmurs, being one of the most independent and high-spirited of men, about living a burden on his wife. I can only answer what in my heart of hearts I feel, that I took him for better and for worse, that I have had many years of the better, and that, even in our present trouble, the worse shows no signs of coming yet. The bead purse is getting on fast, red and blue in a pretty striped pattern. 21st. A busy day. We go to Appletree Wick tomorrow, paying bills and packing up, all poor William's new canvases and painting things huddled together into a packing case. He looked so sad, sitting silent with his green shade on, while his old familiar working materials were disappearing around him, as if he and they were never to come together again, that the tears would start into my eyes, though I am sure I'm not one of the crying sort. Luckily the green shade kept him from seeing me, and I took good care, though the effort nearly choked me, that he should not hear I was crying at any rate. The bead purse is done. How are we to get the steel rings and tassels for it? I'm not justified now in spending sixpence unnecessarily, even for the best of purposes. 22nd. 23rd. The farm of Appletree Wick. Too tired, after our move yesterday, to write a word in my diary about our journey to this delightful place. But now that we're beginning to get settled, I can manage to make up for past omissions. My first occupation on the morning of the move had, oddly enough, nothing to do with our departure for the farmhouse. The moment breakfast was over, I began the day by making Emily as smart and nice looking as I could to go to the doctor's with the purse. She had her best silk frock on, showing the mending a little in some places, I'm afraid, and her straw hat trimmed with my bonnet ribbon. Her father's neck scarf, turned and joined so that nobody could see it, made a nice mantilla for her, and away she went to the doctor's, with a little, determined step, and the purse in her hand. Such a pretty hand that it is hardly to be regretted that I had no gloves for her. They were delighted with the purse, which I ought to mention was finished with some white beads. We found them in rummaging among our boxes, and they made beautiful rings and tassels, contrasting charmingly with the blue and red of the rest of the purse. The doctor and his little girl were, as I've said, delighted with the present, and they gave Emily, in return, a work-box for herself, and a box of sugar plums for her baby sister. The child came back all flushed with the pleasure of the visit, and quite helped to keep up her father's spirits with talking to him about it. So much for the highly interesting history of the bead purse. Toward the afternoon the light cart from the farmhouse came to fetch us and our things to Appletree Wick. It was quite a warm spring day, and I had another pang to bear as I saw poor William helped into the cart, looking so sickly and sad with his miserable green shade in the cheerful sunlight. "God only knows, Leah, how this will succeed with us," he said as we started, then sighed and fell silent again. Just outside the town the doctor met us. "Good luck go with you," he cried, swinging his stick in his usual hasty way. "I shall come and see you as soon as you are all settled at the farmhouse." "Good-bye, sir," says Emily, struggling up with all her might among the bundles in the bottom of the cart. "Good-bye, and thank you again for the work-box and the sugar plums." That was my child all over. She never wants telling. The doctor kissed his hand and gave another flourish with his stick. So we parted. How I should have enjoyed the drive if William could only have looked, as I did, at the young firs on the heath bending beneath the steady breeze, at the shadows flying over the smooth fields, at the high white clouds moving on in their grand airy procession over the gladsome blue sky. It was a hilly road, and I begged the lad who drove us not to press the horse, so we were nearly an hour, at our slow rate of going, before we drew up at the gate of Appletree Wick. 24th February to 2nd of March. We've now been here long enough to know something of the place and the people. First, as to the place. Where the farmhouse now is, there was once a famous priory. The tower is still standing, and the great room where the monks ate and drank, used at present as a granary. The house itself seems to have been tacked on to the ruins anyhow. No two rooms in it are on the same level. The children do nothing but tumble about the passages, because there always happens to be a step up or down, just at the darkest part of every one of them. As for staircases, there seems to me to be one for each bedroom. I do nothing but lose my way, and the farmer says, drolling, that he must have signposts put up for me in every corner of the house from top to bottom. On the ground floor, besides the usual domestic offices, we have the best parlour, a dark, airless, expensively furnished solitude, never invaded by anybody. The kitchen, and a kind of hall, with a fireplace as big as a drawing-room at our town lodgings. Here we live and take our meals. Here the children can wreck it about to their heart's content. Here the dogs come lumbering in whenever they can get loose. Here wages are paid, visitors are received, bacon is cured, cheese is tasted, pipes are smoked, and naps are taken every evening by the male members of the family. Never was such a comfortable, friendly dwelling place devised as this hall. I feel already as if half my life had been passed in it. Out of doors, looking beyond the flower garden, lawn, backyards, pigeon houses, and kitchen gardens, we are surrounded by a network of smooth grazing fields, each shut off from the other by its neat hedgerow and its sturdy gate. Beyond the fields, the hills seem to flow away gently from us into the far blue distance, till they are lost in the bright softness of the sky. At one point, which we can see from our bedroom windows, they dip suddenly into the plain and show, over the rich, marshy flat, a strip of distant sea, a strip sometimes blue, sometimes grey, sometimes, when the sun sets, a streak of fire, sometimes, on showery days, a flash of silver light. The inhabitants of the farmhouse have one great and rare merit. They are people whom you can make friends with at once. Between not knowing them at all and knowing them well enough to shake hands at first sight, there is no ceremonious interval or formal gradation whatever. They received us, on our arrival, exactly as if we were old friends returned from some long travelling expedition. Before we'd been 10 minutes in the hall, William had the easiest chair in the snuggest corner, the children were eating bread and jam on the window seat, and I was talking to the farmer's wife, with the cat on my lap, of the time when Emily had the measles. The family numbers 7, exclusive of the indoor servants, of course. First came the farmer and his wife. He is a tall, sturdy, loud-voiced, active old man. She the easiest, plumpest and gayest woman of 60 I ever met with. They have 3 sons and 2 daughters. The 2 eldest of the young men are employed on the farm. The third is a sailor, and is making holiday time of it just now at Appletreewick. The daughters are pictures of health and freshness. I have but one complaint to make against them. They are beginning to spoil the children already. In this tranquil place, and among these genial, natural people, how happily my time might be passed, were it not for the saddening sight of William's affliction, and the wearing uncertainty of how we are to provide for future necessities. It is a hard thing for my husband and me, after having had the day made pleasant by kind words and friendly offices, to feel this one anxious thought always forcing itself on us at night. Shall we have the means of stopping in our new home in a month's time? After Dark Part 2. 3rd. A rainy day. The children difficult to manage. William miserably despondent. Perhaps he influenced me, or perhaps I felt my little troubles with the children more than usual. But however it was, I have not been so heavy-hearted since the day when my husband first put on the green shade. A listless, hopeless sensation would steal over me. But why write about it? Better to try and forget it. There is always tomorrow to look to when today is at the worst. 4th. Tomorrow has proved worthy of the faith I put in it. Sunshine again out of doors, and as clear and true a reflection of it in my own heart as I can hope to have just at this time. Oh, that month, that one poor month of respite! What are we to do at the end of the month? 5th. I made my short entry for yesterday in the afternoon, just before tea time, little thinking of events destined to happen with the evening that would be really worth chronicling, for the sake of the excellent results to which they are sure to lead. My tendency is to be too sanguine about everything, I know, but I am, nevertheless, firmly persuaded that I can see a new way out of our present difficulties, a way of getting money enough to keep us all in comfort at the farmhouse until William's eyes are well again. The new project, which is to relieve us from all uncertainties for the next 6 months, actually originated with me. It has raised me many inches higher in my own estimation already. If the doctor only agrees with my view of the case when he comes to-morrow, William will allow himself to be persuaded, I know, and then let them say what they please, I will answer for the rest. This is how the new idea first found its way into my head. We'd just done tea. William, in much better spirits than usual, was talking with the young sailor, who is jocosely called here by the very ugly name of Foul-weather Dick. The farmer and his two eldest sons were composing themselves on the oaken settles for their usual nap. The dame was knitting, the two girls were beginning to clear the tea-table, and I was darning the children's socks. To all appearance, this was not a very propitious state of things for the creation of new ideas, and yet my idea grew out of it for all that. Talking with my husband on various subjects connected with life in ships, the young sailor began giving us a description of his hammock, telling us how it was slung, how it was impossible to get into it any other way than stern foremost, whatever that may mean, how the rolling of the ship made it rock like a cradle, and how on rough nights it sometimes swayed to and fro at such a rate as to bump bodily against the ship's side and wake him up with the sensation of having just received a punch on the head from a remarkably hard fist. Hearing all this, I ventured to suggest that it must be an immense relief to him to sleep on shore in a good, motionless, solid, four-posted bed. But to my surprise he scoffed at the idea, said he never slept comfortably out of his hammock, declared that he quite missed his occasional punch on the head from the ship's side, and ended by giving a most comical account of all the uncomfortable sensations he felt when he slept in a four-post bed. The odd nature of one of the young sailor's objections to sleeping on shore reminded my husband, as indeed it did me too, of the terrible story of a bed in a French gambling house, which he once heard from a gentleman whose likeness he took. "You're laughing at me," says honest Foul-weather Dick, seeing William turn toward me and smile. "No, indeed," says my husband. "That last objection of yours to the four-post beds on shore seems by no means ridiculous to me, at any rate. I once knew a gentleman, Dick, who practically realized your objection." "Excuse me, sir," says Dick after a pause and with an appearance of great bewilderment and curiosity, "but could you put 'practically realized' into plain English so that a poor man like me might have a chance of understanding you?" "Certainly," says my husband, laughing. "I mean that I once knew a gentleman who actually saw and felt what you say in jest you are afraid of seeing and feeling whenever you sleep in a four-post bed. Do you understand that?" Foul-weather Dick understood it perfectly, and begged with great eagerness to hear what the gentleman's adventure really was. The dame, who had been listening to our talk, backed her son's petition. The two girls sat down expectant at the half-cleared tea-table. Even the farmer and his drowsy sons roused themselves lazily on the settle. My husband saw that he stood fairly committed to the relation of the story, so he told it without more ado. I have often heard him relate that strange adventure. William is the best teller of a story I ever met with, to friends of all ranks in many different parts of England, and I never yet knew it fail of producing an effect. The farmhouse audience were, I may almost say, petrified by it. I never before saw people look so long in the same direction and sit so long in the same attitude as they did. Even the servants stole away from their work in the kitchen and, unrebuked by master or mistress, stood quite spellbound in the doorway to listen. Observing all this in silence while my husband was going on with his narrative, the thought suddenly flashed across me. Why should William not get a wider audience for that story, as well as for others which he has heard from time to time from his sitters, and which he has hitherto only repeated in private among a few friends? People tell stories in books and get money for them. What if we told our stories in a book? And what if the book sold? Why, freedom, surely, from the one great anxiety that is now preying on us. Money enough to stop at the farmhouse till William's eyes are fit for work again. I almost jumped up from my chair as my thought went on shaping itself in this manner. When great men make wonderful discoveries, do they feel sensations like mine, I wonder? Was Sir Isaac Newton within an ace of skipping into the air when he first found out the law of gravitation? Did Friar Bacon longed to dance when he lit the match and heard the first charge of gunpowder in the world go off with a bang. I had to put a strong constraint on myself, or I should have communicated all that was passing in my mind to William before our friends at the farmhouse. But I knew it was best to wait until we were alone, and I did wait. What a relief it was when we all got up at last to say good night. The moment we were in our own room, I could not stop to take so much as a pin out of my dress before I began. "My dear," said I never heard you tell that gambling house adventure so well before. What an effect it had upon our friends! What an effect, indeed, it always has wherever you tell it." So far he did not seem to take much notice. He just nodded, and began to pour out some of the lotion in which he always bathes his poor eyes the last thing at night. "And as for that, William," I went on, "all your stories seem to interest people. What a number you've picked up, first and last, from different sitters, in the 15 years of your practice as a portrait painter! Have you any idea how many stories you really do know?" No, he could not undertake to say how many just then. He gave this answer in a very indifferent tone, dabbing away all the time at his eyes with the sponge and lotion. He did it so awkwardly and roughly, as it seemed to me, that I took the sponge from him and applied the lotion tenderly myself. "Do you think," said I, "if you turned over one of your stories carefully in your mind beforehand, say, the one you told tonight, for example, that you could repeat it all to me so perfectly and deliberately that I should be able to take it down in writing from your lips?" Yes, of course he could, but why ask that question? "Because I should like to have all the stories that you've been in the habit of relating to our friends set down fairly in writing, by way of preserving them from ever being forgotten." Would I bathe his left eye now, because that felt the hottest tonight? I began to forebode that his growing indifference to what I was saying would soon end in his fairly going to sleep before I had developed my new idea, unless I took some means of forthwith of stimulating his curiosity, or, in other words, of waking him into a proper state of astonishment and attention. "William," said I, without another syllable of preface, "I've got a new plan for finding all the money we want for our expenses here." He jerked his head up directly and looked at me. "What plan?" "This. The state of your eyes prevents you, for the present, from following your profession as an artist, does it not? Very well. What are you to do with your idle time, my dear? Turn author. And how are you to get the money we want? By publishing a book." "Good gracious, Leah, are you out of your senses?" he exclaimed. I put my arm round his neck and sat down on his knee, the course I always take when I want to persuade him to anything with as few words as possible. "Now, William, listen patiently to me," I said. "An artist lies under this great disadvantage in case of accidents. His talents are of no service to him unless he can use his eyes and fingers. An author, on the other hand, can turn his talents to account just as well by means of other people's eyes and fingers as by means of his own. In your present situation, therefore, you have nothing for it, as I said before, but to turn author. Wait, and hear me out. The book I want you to make is a book of all your stories. You shall repeat them, and I will write them down from your dictation. Our manuscript shall be printed. We will sell the book to the public, and so support ourselves honorably in adversity by doing the best we can to interest and amuse others." While I was saying all this, I suppose in a very excitable manner, my husband looked, as our young sailor friend would phrase it, quite taken aback. "You were always quick at contriving, Leah," he said. "But how in the world came you to think of this plan?" "I thought of it while you were telling them the gambling house adventure downstairs," I answered. "It is an ingenious idea, and a bold idea," he went on thoughtfully. "But it is one thing to tell a story to a circle of friends, and another thing to put it into a printed form for an audience of strangers. Consider, my dear, that we are neither of us used to what is called writing for the press." "Very true," said I, "but nobody is used to it when they first begin, and yet plenty of people have tried the hazardous literary experiment successfully. Besides, in our case, we have the materials ready to our hands. Surely we can succeed in shaping them presentably if we aim at nothing but the simple truth." Who is to do the eloquent descriptions and the striking reflections and all that part of it?" said William, perplexedly shaking his head. "Nobody," I replied. "The eloquent descriptions and the striking reflections are just the parts of a story book that people never read. Whatever we do, let us not, if we can possibly help it, write so much as a single sentence that can be conveniently skipped. Come, come," I continued, seeing him begin to shake his head again. "No more objections, William. I am too certain of the success of my plan to endure them. If you still doubt, let us refer the new project to a competent arbitrator. The doctor is coming to see you tomorrow. I will tell him all that I have told you, and if you will promise on your side, I will engage on mine to be guided entirely by his opinion." William smiled and readily gave the promise. This was all I wanted to send me to bed in the best spirits. For of course I should never have thought of mentioning the doctor as an arbitrator if I had not known beforehand that he was sure to be on my side. 6th. The arbitrator has shown that he deserved my confidence in him. He ranked himself entirely on my side before I had half done explaining to him what my new project really was. As to my husband's doubts and difficulties, the dear good man would not so much as hear them mentioned. "No objections," he cried gaily. "Set to work, Mr. Kirby, and make your fortune. I always said your wife was worth her weight in gold, and here she is now, all ready to get into the bookseller's scales and prove it. Set to work! Set to work!" "With all my heart," said William, beginning at last to catch the infection of our enthusiasm. "But when my part of the work and my wife's has been completed, what are we to do with the produce of our labour?" "Leave that to me," answered the doctor. "Finish your book and send it to my house. I will show it at once to the editor of our country newspaper. He has plenty of literary friends in London, and he will be just the man to help you. By the by," added the doctor, addressing me, "you think of everything, Mrs. Kirby. Pray, have you thought of a name yet for the new book?" At that question it was my turn to be taken aback. The idea of naming the book had never once entered my mind. "A good title is of vast importance," said the doctor, knitting his brows thoughtfully. "We must all think about that. What shall it be? Mrs. Kirby, what shall it be?" "Perhaps something may strike us after we've fairly set to work," my husband suggested. "Talking of work," he continued, turning to me, "how are you to find time, Leah, with your nursery occupations, for writing down all the stories as I tell them?" "I've been thinking of that this morning," said I, "and I've come to the conclusion that I shall have but little leisure to write from your dictation in the daytime. What with dressing and washing the children, teaching them, giving them their meals, taking them out to walk, and keeping them amused at home, to say nothing of sitting sociably at work with the dame and her 2 girls in the afternoon, I am afraid I shall have few opportunities of doing my part of the book between breakfast and tea time. But when the children are in bed, and the farmer and his family are reading or dozing, I should have at least 3 unoccupied hours to spare. So, if you don't mind putting off our working time till after dark—" "There's the title!" shouted the doctor, jumping out of his chair as if he had been shot. "Where?" cried I, looking all round me in the surprise of the moment, as if I had expected to see the title magically inscribed for us on the walls of the room. "In your last words, to be sure," rejoined the doctor. "You said just now that you would not have leisure to write from Mr. Kirby's dictation till after dark. What can we do better than name the book after the time when the book is written? Call it boldly After Dark. Stop! Before anybody says a word for or against it, let us see how the name looks on paper." I opened my writing desk in a great flutter. The doctor selected the largest sheet of paper and the broadest nibbed pen he could find, and wrote in majestic round text letters, with alternate thin and thick strokes beautiful to see, the 2 cabalistic words, "After Dark." We all 3 laid our heads together over the paper, and in breathless silence studied the effect of the round text. William raising his green shade in the excitement of the moment, and actually disobeying the doctor's orders about not using his eyes in the doctor's own presence. After a good long stare, we looked round solemnly in each other's faces and nodded. There was no doubt whatever on the subject after seeing the round text. In one happy moment the doctor had hit on the right name. "I have written the title page," said our good friend, taking up his hat to go, and now I leave it to you two to write the book." Since then I have mended 4 pens and bought a quire of letter paper at the village shop. William is to ponder well over his stories in the daytime, so as to be quite ready for me after dark. We are to commence our new occupation this evening. My heart beats fast and my eyes moisten when I think of it. How many of our dearest interests depend upon the one little beginning that we are to make to-night! End of section 3.